back, knitters. We're doing part 2 of our felted clog knit along. So today we're going to knit the top of the foot. I'll give you some tips about that. In the meantime, though, I want to give a hearty welcome to 5 new patrons this last week. Thanks so much for joining the channel and supporting the channel. Makes me happy to see people joining the patron family. So I want to give a hearty thank you to, I have my little list here, Linnell, Kate, Mary, Sandra, and Anel. Thanks so much for joining the Purl Together patron family. If you are interested in becoming a patron, hop on over to patreon.com/Purl Together to see what I'm offering for your small pledge each month. Okay, let's get started with the top of the foot portion. Now, if you're knitting them in the round, according to the pattern, you'll want to follow along for this color, right? And then I'll also put some timestamps down below in the video description. So if you want to skip ahead and see how I'm knitting the ones that I'm doing back and forth, you'll watch for the brown ones and you'll see how I go back and forth and not join in the round. That's particularly useful if you don't have quite the right cable on your circular needles and you don't need to worry so much about that. You can just go back and forth and it's super simple. All right, let's get started. Okay, we're about to begin the upper part of the clog. If you're changing colors, I'll show you how I attach a new color. You can just start knitting, but what I like to do is make a little lark's head. It's called a lark's head, or it's really a couple half hitches, but you're just gonna make a loop like this, put your thumb and forefinger up inside there, and then go around the outside. So you're making one of these that cinches. The tighter you pull, the tighter it cinches. Now I do that after I've cut my other clog color yarn, and the reason I've made this tail so long is because we're going to use it to sew up the center seam later. So it doesn't matter if you didn't, don't worry if you didn't, you know, if you just cut that a couple inches, don't worry. So I just put that up through that loop and tighten it down. Now this is what I'm going to do. You can also just tie it on there, it's fine. Or you can just start knitting with it. It's going to be all felted together and mashed on there, so it doesn't matter if it's pretty. But all we're going to do first is join your second color and knit one row. And you're going to use a marker if you choose to mark this as the right side. So you'll see why as we go. So we're just going to knit one row and go all the way around. And then I'll show you how I'm going to join into the round. So again, this first color, or this first clog with the light gray sole and my teal-ish color. This is called Persian Peacock from Brown Sheep Company, Lamb's Pride worsted. And I really, really like this color with the gray. I think it looks fantastic. So I'm just going to knit one round and then I'll show you how I'm going to join. Okay, I've knitted all the way around one time, and instead of turning my work and going back, now I'm going to join into the round. So what I'm going to do this is I'm going to trade places with the last stitch I knitted and the first stitch I knitted. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to take this off. You can put it on a locking stitch marker or just hang on to it for a second because it's pretty big yarn. And then I'm going to put the last stitch I knitted back onto the left, and then I'm going to grab up the one that I'm holding. There we go. So we did a big swap there. Now, what I'm going to do is slip this first stitch because that's where my working yarn's coming from. And I could just knit it, and that's fine, but I'm just going to slip it. The other thing you can do right here if you want to is put a marker, put your beginning of the round marker right here. Since we traded places with the last one and the first one, this is the beginning of the round. So I'm just going to slip this first one, and then I'm going to knit one complete round. Then we're going to start the toe shaping. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is many of you, like me, are just have one skein of your contrasting color for the top of the foot, and you're wondering, well, there's a couple ways you can do this. If you're knitting with 2 strands and you're holding this double, all I'm doing is knitting from the inside and the outside. And yeah, it kind of gets twisted, and sometimes I have to untwist that, but it's really not a big deal to have your one strand come from the inside and one from the outside. And I just kind of let it flop around on the floor or in a bowl or whatever. So the other option would be to unwind all of this, split it in half, and do 2 different yarn cakes if you want to do that, if that's easier for you. I don't think it's that big of a deal to just do inside and outside of the same skein. Okay, so I've done my next complete round, and this is where my beginning of the round marker would be if I'm using one. I could tell that's the beginning of the round just because that's where my sole stitches are split. So no big deal there. All right, so we're just going to follow the instructions on that pattern for the toe and the instep shaping. Okay, when you're doing the series of short rows to shape the toe and the top of the foot, you're going to knit, you know, slip one as if to purl, always as if to purl, knit across however many stitches you have for that particular row, and then you're going to come to this gap. So that's how you can always double check yourself and know that that gap is where you're going to go slip one as if to knit, slip as if to knit, and then knit those two together. So then knit one. And after you close the gap, you're always going to have a knit or a purl after that gap. So you can see that that's where we did the decrease because of the slant. And so the opposite is true when you're going back the other direction. You're going to slip that first stitch as if, and then purl however many for that particular whatever row you're on. Then you're going to get to the point where you can feel the gap and you can see the gap here, and you're going to purl those two together and purl one. Now you will get to the point where in the shaping as we're going across and using up these side stitches to shape the top of the foot. After you close the gap, normally you knit one or purl one, but there will be a point in the pattern that you need to be aware of where you're going to knit 2 or 3 or purl 2 or 3 after that, you know, when we get down to the end down here. So just be mindful of that. Don't make any assumptions and read your pattern carefully for each row. Also, you'll get to the point where we've decreased enough of these stitches around here that you're going to want to, that's when you're going to want to change to your 16-inch cable. Or if you're using DPNs, you can change to that. The other thing I like about this pattern is after you do a sequence of short rows periodically, they tell, you know, the designer tells you how many stitches you should have in total on your needle. So I, you know, really appreciate that. You can double check yourself there. And if you're coming out wrong, it's likely you just have a minor error. So just tink it back until you know that you're correct. Okay, the other thing I'll point out is as you're knitting through the short rows on the toe, you're going to come to the point where you're going to knit, you know, 7 or 8 stitches, and then you're going to do a decrease, knit one, and then do another decrease, and then knit across. The point of that here is simply to do some shaping and do some decreasing and draw the edges in, because if you didn't do that, the whole thing would be way too wide on your foot, and that would be kind of ridiculous. So that little bit of shaping, in addition to the decreases on the outside, just makes the whole thing, it sucks in the whole thing and makes it more shape to your foot. Okay, moving on now to this other one that I'm going to show you. And again, this is the kind of tannish brown and darker brown that I'm making for my mom. And this one, I'm going to knit back and forth. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So again, we're going to start off the same where I'm going to do the same thing to change colors and knit that first round. And then I'll show you how I'm going to not join and just knit back and forth on this one. Okay, after I change colors, the pattern indicates just to knit one row and mark this as the right side. So I did that. And I'm not going to need to mark it as the right side. And I mean, you can if you want. That's fine. You could just put a locking stitch marker here and you'll know. I pretty well know what's the right side, and that'll all become very evident here in a moment. As you decrease for the top of the foot, what's going to happen is you'll have fewer stitches here, and sometimes it'll become stretched a little bit if you have too long of a cable. So rather than joining in the round and knitting another row, I'm just going to turn my work and purl a row. Okay, the other note that I'll point out here, we're in the section now where it says join in the round. Now there's a fit note that says if you're going to make this for someone who has an extra wide foot, you'd want to knit one more row around. Now if you're knitting back and forth and you're not joining in the round, then you'd have to do that twice. You'd have to go purl, you'd have to knit one and then purl back. So that'd be 2 extra rounds, because you want to begin the toe and instep section, that shaping section, you want to start on the right side. So you don't want to end up, you know, if you only knitted 1 extra row, you'd end up over here, and that's not going to work. So if you have to make it bigger, it's better to make it a little bit bigger and then felt it down to fit you and shrink it down. But you are going to want to start on the right side for the toe and instep shaping section. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so otherwise it's going to be the same for quite a while. It's the same, just follow through the instructions. We're going to do the short rows, the toe and instep section. We're going to knit to the middle here and then do a whole series of short rows back and forth, just as the pattern indicates. The only other difference with knitting back and forth will come later on, and I'll show you that when I get there. Okay, I've worked all the rows as indicated by the pattern, just going back and forth as it says, and now I've gotten to the end and I'm almost finished with the top of the foot. I've reached the part of the pattern where it says next step. So now, if I were doing this in the round, I would do exactly what it says, and I would not turn my work, and I would just work 1 round on the right side as shown in the pattern. However, since I've been going back and forth and I never did join in the round, instead of working one row on the right side, I'm just going to slip the first stitch and I'm going to purl my way all the way around. And then because I'll be purling, I'll come to this last gap and I'm just going to purl those together and then end with 2. So then that'll be the conclusion of the top of the foot. And then I'll show you the differences when we get to the cuff next time. Okay, I hope you found those tips helpful. Next time we'll be joining the cuff, which is this part here, and I'll show you how to roll it down and attach it. It's pretty straightforward, but sometimes people get a little bit hung up on the part where you attach it and cast off at the same time. So watch for that for the next video. If you find these helpful, click like and subscribe. Okay, if you missed any, I'll put a link down below for the playlist, and you can go back and forth as you need to. All right, thanks for watching.